Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
It is I, the one, the only.
Well, let's go ahead and get started, alright?
Alright, man.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Character Discussions. I'm Sid Pertu, joining me today is...
Alfie, a geek for fun.
Indeed he is. So Alfie doesn't know what character we're discussing, but you, the audience, do, because you can look at the thumbnail and the title of the video. Alfie, if you just had to guess, based on no context whatsoever, what character do you think we're discussing?
Matter Eater Boy.
Matter Eater Boy? No, that's too popular a character to discuss. No, we're going to discuss someone who's much more, less mainstream, and that is Venom.
Oh, okay.
yeah. Alfie is a bit of a Spider fan, a webhead. What do the Spider-Man fan base call themselves? Do they have a cute name?
At war with each other.
Okay. So yeah, Venom's just one of those characters who I have an irrational liking for. I don't know if I've ever told you this. The very first comic book I ever had from when I was a kid is an issue of Spider-Man with Venom in it. And it's not even like I like remember it very fondly. I just remember going to the comic shop and being like, I want a story with Venom in it, and they're like, well, this one. And I remember very little about it except for Eddie Brock walks into, I believe it's the Daily Bugle, disguised as the guy changing the water cooler tank, and kidnaps Peter Parker. I may be misremembering that. Anyway, what is your earliest experience with Venom?
It's one of those characters where, like, I can't remember it because I was so young, but my mother always tells me, like, because whenever I talk about like, my cosplay stuff with her, she always tells me, like, oh, you were so obsessed with Venom, you wouldn't stop talking about Venom. It actually had me and the teachers quite concerned because you would talk about Venom more than Spider-Man, and it was quite scary how you would draw at like 3 years old these very black, scarily teethed creature in quite good detail. And teachers who didn't know who he were like, is this a warning sign?
Oh, that is so precious.
Yeah, Venom is just like, as I've got older and I've got other Spider-Man characters and different villains and stuff and got more into the lore, he's kind of like dropped off in terms of like my appreciation. But there is always, I feel like most people have this because specifically like if you've been born after his creation in the 90s and extra and 90s onwards, Spider-Man inherently is like a kid's appealing character because he's got the cool design, he's probably the most visual appealing superheroes, and then you get Venom and he's just that but black and cooler, and it's just okay, so kids are always going to gravitate towards that with like cartoons, and he's kind of goofy. And so I feel like Venom, no matter who you are, you're lying to yourself if you don't think at least at one point, if you're exposed to him at a young age, you didn't think Venom was just like the coolest shit.
I mean, no, it totally is. It erupted into just a world of it's almost its own sub thing. It's not X-Men level, but it is almost its own sub thing of like Venom lore now. Of all the things, like Marvel has tried so many different things to capitalize on the character, and it has just been wrapped up in such a strange little lore now that it just keeps getting more and more ridiculous. Even over the last couple of years, I know it's gotten even more involved, and there's been like really good puns. I didn't read the series because I just don't trust Venom in comics anymore, but there's a title called Venom, and it was about like symbiotes in Vietnam or something. I don't know, but it was like such a good pun.
It was a good comic as well, surprisingly.
I don't believe you. I don't believe any comic with Venom in it is actually good. I'll put a caveat that the trial of Venom with the Spider-Man Matt Murdock story is actually pretty fun. But yeah, so Venom is one of those things where like, yeah, there's this undeniable immediate appeal to the visual style of the character and like this cool like just edgelord factor to it. But literally, I've never read a good Venom story. There's been things with promise. There's been things that are cool or fun. I've yet to ever see anything that I think like gets what I think the character should be. And the funny part about that is, I think that's the problem. I think Venom is such a blank slate of just a design that everyone has a different interpretation of what you should do with it, and no one's interpretation agrees with anyone else's.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, because I think maybe it might be fair to say that I've read a little bit more Spider-Man than you might have, Ian, but even I can say, like, yeah, Venom stories, like, okay, so you start with Amazing Spider-Man 300, and, like, that's a good introduction, but that's really all it is. Like, and like Venom's revealed as Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock's never been mentioned prior to this, so it's just not even like get the fact, oh, he's a long-running character who's been revealed. It's like, no, Eddie Brock just turns up as Venom and then is revealed. It's kind of weak.
So like the opposite of the Hobgoblin.
Yeah, it's like, okay, because he was hyped up months before, and people were thinking, oh, is this going to be like an old Spider-Man villain reborn as like this cool thing, and he'll be like a Norman Osborn figure, where you meet him and then he's revealed as the Green Goblin. But no, Venom just turns up as Eddie Brock. Why are we supposed to care? I don't know. And then later on, we get more and more stuff with him. It kind of gets off the walls, a bit more goofy. You get the stint as an anti-hero, and then he gives up, and it's not Eddie Brock for like a good decade, and then he's back. He's just such a messy character that isn't even given time to, like, occasionally characters can like go on long stints where they are kind of overexposed. Like Carnage kind of has this similar because they're very linked. But Carnage will kind of go on breaks where he'll be good for like 5 years and then they won't ever have any more Carnage stories. But then he'll turn up again. Venom is always exposed, and that's kind of the problem, is why he always is in stories, but he's never given enough time for someone to sit down and think what he should be in those stories.
Yeah, and like even when I find an interpretation of the character that I like, it immediately goes off the rails, and I don't know why. There was a series a couple years ago, I can't remember the name of the writer-artist team on it, but the character Lee was introduced as someone who could take control of the symbiote, which was like really unique. And I really liked the beginning of that series because it was getting into the kind of abusive relationship dynamic that I think the Venom symbiote perfectly embodies and shows off in a great way. And then fucking halfway through it, Eddie Brock just randomly gets the symbiote back, and we spend like, I think 7 or 8 issues fucking around with dinosaur people living in the sewers of New York, and I'm like, what the fuck happened? It just goes off the fucking rails, and it loses itself in this strange, weird little world it's created. But I do think I think that the Venom symbiote relationship has so much potential to be really interesting, and this is probably my hottest take on Venom that I can give.
Okay.
Spider-Man 3 actually had the best foundation for the Venom storyline I've ever seen or read.
I'm kind of with you to a point.
Okay, my reasoning is the symbiote has reasons to hate Spider-Man because he abandons it. It's not done well, but the groundwork's there. And Eddie Brock has reasons to hate Peter Parker because he's screwed over his life. Again, it's not done well, but the groundwork's there. And that is the best fucking way to pit those two together. These two characters that have this toxic relationship based off of mutual hatred of the two personas of Peter Parker, and that kind of feeding into each other. And then the thing that's introduced, and it wasn't done in the movie, and that's so disappointing, but like the thing that the first time Spider-Man defeats Venom is still one of my favorites. It's part of what feeds into the whole I guess I'm a symbiote and Eddie shipper.
Broxim.
Yeah, Broxim. What is that? What they call themselves? But like that first time that Peter Parker is facing off and is able to defeat the symbiote, it's because he tricks it and says, "Okay, you're right. I want you back." And then it leaves Brock, but they're bonded too closely, so it nearly kills them both. I love that moment so much because it just epitomizes that like really toxic relationship that all three of these characters share. I always thought that was so fucking good.
No, and it's clever as well on like Spider-Man's side, being able to call it out and like address it, because that I feel like Venom is at his best specifically when he's linked to Spider-Man, because again you have this meeting of these like two completely different figures with Eddie Brock and the symbiote, who are then joined and become Venom, which I think is an important distinction. Is the symbiote isn't Venom, Eddie Brock isn't Venom, it's those two together are Venom as a separate character, at least in the take I like, because then that's specifically something meant to hurt Peter, and it's specifically like why they speak in the dual voice and refer to themselves as we in that form. And then you can kind of get into some interesting like which is more dependent on the other thing. But on the Spider-Man 3 angle, I do agree with you, because my take on Eddie Brock is kind of more, I've always leaned more to the ultimate interpretation of Eddie, the kind of spectacular Spider-Man, and then even the Spider-Man 3 version, where he necessarily isn't. Okay, so Peter can screw him over in some ways, but what I've always liked with Venom, and what I think more people should kind of pick up on, because this has got more like emotional weight as like an actual recurring villain, is I always like the idea that Peter Parker and Eddie Brock were really close friends, but Eddie Brock is that guy who is like in everyone's lives. He's that friend who you think is a cool guy because you've known him for so long, but is actually a really, really toxic kind of fuck off, like actual douchebag. And it takes you getting on his bad side for you to realize that. And there's a lot of real life Peter Parker situations there where like he's a character who like Norman Osborn is like the father figure gone bad kind of thing. That's a lot of weight there, and you can get a lot of drama from that interpretation. But everyone always kind of goes too far with that and then leans into like the whole, Eddie Brock protects the innocents and he sees Peter Parker as against innocence. And you get into more weird, like abstract shit, which then leads to, like you say, like the dinosaur adventures and symbiotes going off to other planets and doing stuff that isn't what you're there to read Venom about.
No, absolutely. And like, that's the thing is, I like the groundwork that Eddie Brock hates Peter Parker and the symbiote hates Spider-Man. The reasoning for Eddie Brock to hate Peter Parker, I do like the idea that it's ultimately irrational, but not unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know? So like the thing I've said and the arc I imagine for the perfect Spider-Man Venom storyline is you have Peter Parker, who is a character who's, tied so intensely to the idea of needing to learn how to take responsibility for your actions. And I mean, most of the time Peter's a teenager, he's a young adult, and I think that people of that age group are certainly, by and large, in need of learning lessons about how they need to take responsibility for themselves. But I also think there's a subset within that age group that takes too much responsibility, that blames everything on themselves. And I think the the lesson that could be really interesting to wrap in with Eddie Brock and the symbiote and Spider-Man is to have Eddie Brock be the kind of guy who nothing is ever his goddamn fault from his point of view.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, he didn't do it. He doesn't deserve this. It's not his fault. And then you have Spider-Man or Peter, who would maybe take too much responsibility for Eddie becoming Venom. And at a certain point, like the lesson you could teach Spider-Man there is, no, some things are just beyond your control. You can't be held responsible for everyone's actions. You can only be held responsible for your own. So cutting something toxic out of your life, like the symbiote, even if that goes onto someone else, that is not your responsibility. And I think that is, it's, again, it ties in really well to the idea of an abusive relationship. It ties in really well with the idea of toxic relationships and toxic people. And I really, really like the idea of that. Again, it's never been done. That's the tragedy of Venom as a Spider-Man villain. Out of everyone, and I don't have as much room to talk here because I'm not as big a Spider-Man fan, but in my opinion, out of all of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, Venom has the most potential as a villain, and it has never been utilized properly, in my humble opinion.
In just terms of like untapped potential, then yeah, definitely. I kind of agree with you. Just on the surface that you have a villain here who not only can be like a threat to Spider-Man, but is also a threat to like Peter Parker. And I guess while we're on like the question, because we've kind of talked about how we like our Eddie Brock to be here, do you think the symbiote being an alien is necessary?
I don't care if they make it like a laboratory experiment or something. I kind of hated it in Ultimate Spider-Man that it was like Spider-Man's DNA taken too far or something. That was the strangest thing. I don't care if it's not an alien. I think ultimately the reason it was an alien is just because they needed to retcon the alien costume.
Yeah.
I don't think it needs to be an alien. I'll say that probably gives it a little more potential for the spin-off stuff, like, your Carnages, your Toxins, your fucking 17,000 other symbiotes. What was the name of the one in the movie that was there for like a whole 2 minutes?
Oh, Riot.
Riot, that's it. Yeah, there we go.
Well, that was a riot indeed. You got Agony, you got Paige, you got Scream. It's just they've got
you got Edgelord.
I'm surprised they haven't done that one yet. Like honestly, like some
you got Shadow the Hedgehog.
The ultimate life form.
Right. Yeah, there we go. No, like that whole fucking subset of stuff is just ridiculous. But no, I don't think it needs to be an alien. Do you?
No, I kind of think it's because it just doesn't gel with like Spider-Man. It's just like it's so you have to make like I sympathize with like Sam Raimi with like Spider-Man 3 getting forced on this. Is you then have to make an entire reason about how Spider-Man comes into contact with this thing that's completely out of his like it's something the Fantastic Four would deal with. It's not something Spider-Man would deal with. Like I know there's like a history of Spider-Man fighting aliens with like the Tinker and stuff in like the older issues, but like he doesn't really like mess with that kind of field. And when something's a science experiment gone wrong, that's like it makes Peter Parker have more like investment in it because he's like, oh shit, that could have been me. Or I like the idea in Ultimate where it is something his father made. That he's like, oh, he takes responsibility for it because he thinks he has to finish it, and then he gets a bit too attached to it, and then he like takes it away from Eddie, and then Eddie, because his parents were involved with it, also has that like sense of Peter, well, this is my responsibility too, and it creates a nice conflict with like legacy, and it makes it more attached to Peter rather than like the general Marvel universe that the symbiote is as an alien.
I'll say, like, the alien thing doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is how long he's got the connection to it. Because you couldn't really do it outside of comics, where, you know, when they gave him the alien costume, it was never intended to be anything else but a costume that could do some cool stuff. And then it later becomes that, as they have to get back to a way to justify the red and blue. It later turns into that. So, you know, you have that whole side of things, but at the same time, just because he spends so long in the costume, it gives so much more credence to Venom's development. Like, you mentioned Ultimate Spider-Man. I read Volume 6 of Ultimate Spider-Man Venom. He spends like 2 minutes in the costume. It's bullshit. I don't buy the relationship because he spends 2 minutes in the goddamn costume. Seriously, if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't he only put it on like once and then just immediately almost kill someone and then decide not to wear it?
In the same night. Night.
Yeah, no, it ruins it at that point. If you don't do the black suit for an extended period of time, like Spider-Man 3, say what you will about it, the black suit is shown to have a long-term effect on Peter Parker's personality. And it gives it some weight and some gravitas.
And there's also some stories you can tell while you have, just like separate from Venom being introduced. In like any adaptation, I know a lot of people like Spectacular Spider-Man as kind of the gold standard in this. And what I really liked about that was, like, subtly, is he has it for about 3-4 episodes, but in those episodes there's meant to be like a passage of time. And as he wears the costume, it starts from being like the Spider-Man 3 black suit, where it's just like white webs and it's just the Spider-Man costume but like black. And then as it slowly takes more and more of his personality, the webs start to fade away until by the last episode with him in it, it's just the classic black suit. And it shows like a passage of time and a passage of Peter's development. And then during those episodes, you also see Eddie Brock start to get worse and worse and worse as he's getting more angry and angry. And I feel like that's like the closest we've ever got to doing it right outside the comics. But I feel, it's like you wouldn't be able to do it properly unless, like, in the MCU, you gave it to Tom Holland for, like, a phase. And he just had the black suit for that entire phase.
Yeah, like, I mean, that damn title, like, you kill Spider-Man in space in Infinity War, and then all of a sudden he's, like, you announce the title, Far From Home, and for, like, a good month there, everyone was like, oh god, they're gonna do the black suit! This is somehow gonna tie in with Venom! And I'm like, it's all there, it's so set up for it to do a whole movie of the black suit or some shit. And no, we just don't. We just waste our opportunities here. That's just the pain of it all. But before we go any further, though, I do want to make sure we wrap back and talk about the movie, because I can't believe that there was a Venom movie, and I already forgot almost everything about it.
Yeah, it's kind of only, it really makes me want to see, because like there's always this like famous thing with, especially nowadays, of like the actor saying, oh, all my favorite parts were cut out. But when Tom Hardy says that and all the weird improv shit he did in that film, I really want to see what got cut out for being too weird in a movie where Tom Hardy jumps in a lobster bath.
See, I didn't even hear about that. I just like, I don't know, that it's, because I'm definitely in the camp that thought the Venom movie could not work because when you take the Spider-Man out of the equation, you lose a very core part of the character. And yeah, you just lost it all for me. He's this brutal anti-hero or whatever. I'm like, okay, but I don't know, like, you need that he's got a villainous tint to him. You need that, like, oh yeah, we'll protect the innocent. I don't like the lethal protector bullshit, but I can at least get behind it if he's willing to be a complete fucking hypocrite when it comes to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I can at least justify it for some reason in my head, but like the second you take, oh yeah, no, I just fucking kill people, but I'm a good guy, and you don't have that villainous tint to it, it doesn't work the same for me.
because he has to be like, the best thing about Venom is like the tagline is like all the power, like no responsibility, but that's only in juxtaposition to Spider-Man. Is like, I feel like if you were gonna really go for like, okay, he has to be a standalone character, I think you'd have to kind of just make him a Spider-Man parody in like the most horror twisted way, because Spider-Man is a character that can lend itself to horror, and like comedy and horror are like closely linked than most people would think, because it's all about like timing and like the punchline delivery. And I think like Venom is like the perfect encapsulation of like, okay, he's the guy who'll attempt to save you, but in doing so, he'll do it like in the worst way possible and then blame you for it. And that's kind of like what J. Jonah Jameson sees Spider-Man as. And I think there's potential there, but no one does stuff with that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this, since I've never really given my thoughts on the Venom movie. It's got a lot going for it that I honestly would not expect. I mean, they made Elon the Musk the villain. I can't hate it too much, like just on principle. But I don't know. There's so much weird going on in that movie, and it gets so convoluted with all the other symbiotes and stuff. What the fuck Cletus Cassidy's gonna be doing? I don't even understand. It's a mess. It's a mess and a half. All right, Venom. What else can we talk about with Venom? Design-wise, we've already touched on the design. But Venom's one of those characters who artists seem to have a lot of fun with. Would you agree that like it's such a simple starting design with McFarlane, and then like everyone kind of takes it in a bunch of different, really interesting directions.
Yeah, like you start with just buff Spider-Man with like a very creepy grin, which works for like just that distinction. But then like McFarlane like starts sharpening the teeth, and then you get other people who start adding like the tongue, and then you start adding like the bile that comes from the tongue, and then you start adding like the symbiote can then make tendrils and stuff, and then you start adding even more like multiple heads, and like you start going crazy with all these different things that the symbiote can do, which it never used to be able to, and you end up with like this design. It's so simple, it kind of works being tested that way, because there's a simple base you can work with, just the white spider, the eyes, and the mouth, and then everything else from that you can kind of go crazy. Like you can have Venom as just the symbiote being in this like tendrilless snake-like thing, but as long as you see the white spider logo and the mouth and the eyes, it still kind of works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do really like that. And it's interesting to see what people have done with it when they remove the symbiote from Eddie. Like, again, the Venom movie, not good, but it gave us a scene where a female possessed symbiote makes out with Eddie Brock and then shoves the symbiote back down his throat. I can't hate that imagery, because that's kind of like the perfect image of Venom to me. It's done to shit. It doesn't make any fucking sense in the context of the movie, but God, if that shot is not perfect, in the most disgusting way. But then you get like the Flash Thompson Venom, which I don't think he really counts. I think I'll have to put Venom parentheses Eddie Brock here. Because there have obviously been multiple hosts. You have like the Scorpion Venom and the Flash Thompson, and those all do cool things. I thought Venom did actually work really well as a cross with Scorpion. That was a cool idea. It wasn't done well from what I've heard, but I liked the design. Flash Thompson got a very cool, like, tactical look. What'd you think of that?
I actually think Agent Venom looks really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because it had been so long since we've seen. Because everyone but Spider-Man seems to go immediately monstrous once they get the symbiote. And I like it when it reflects what they want from it. So when Peter gets the symbiote, it's like just his Spider-Man costume, but like sleeker. But when Eddie gets it, because he's like angry, and then it goes to the monstrous design. So I liked seeing more people, like, because when we see like Wolverine get it, he goes like feral crazy. But when Flash got it, because he's a soldier at heart, it reflects just like a Spider-Manized Venom soldier without going crazy with like the teeth and stuff.
Is it Web of Dimensions? I'm trying to remember which Spider-Man game. There's one where like he's crossing over with other universes, kind of a precursor to Spider-Verse, and you see a version of Peter Parker that bonded permanently with the symbiote.
Oh, shattered dimensions.
Shattered dimensions. That's
Yeah,
it.
he's not bonded permanently because in that one it's just Ultimate Peter, but because he's the youngest one in that game, Madam Web gives him the symbiote because he needs a power boost.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. I thought the whole gimmick there was that he was permanently bonded.
Oh, but there is a what if. There's two what ifs with that premise.
Oh yeah, any good?
Yeah. One of them is they're both very weird. So one of them is like Secret Wars what if, where like the entire cast of Secret Wars never got transported back to Earth, and so Peter Parker has to basically stay with the symbiote forever. And it gets to the point because this is still before the retcon, where they had to give a reason why this Eddie Brock can still be alive, because the symbiote didn't used to boost all your powers. It used to just be like a vampire thing, which just drains your adrenaline until like eventually you die. It didn't used to boost Spider-Man's strength or anything or make his personality different when he first wore it in the comics. So this is eventually Peter Parker. They removed the symbiote from him eventually. It's been like a couple of years. And because he's had it on 24/7 and he hasn't known to take off, he's like an old man who then just dies. And then like the one when he goes onto Earth and he keeps it, he doesn't get a chance to remove it, and it sticks with him like forever, and it finishes bonding permanently. And it gets to the point where like he ends up going like power crazed, and like he fights like the Avengers and stuff, and then Peter Parker dies in that one as well. So it's never a good thing that Peter keeps the symbiote apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want it to be. It's just one of those like curiosity things. So, I guess one thing we've talked about here is that Venom doesn't really work in comics very well. Like or in stories very well. No one's really hit the nail on the head with Venom. But of course, that's within the context of Eddie Brock. Do you think that he's worked better with some of the other hosts he's had? Like, I don't even know who the fuck had him during the whole Guardians of the Galaxy thing.
That was Flash again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, do you think he works better with other hosts, or is it just the original Venom duo of Eddie and the symbiote doesn't work?
I feel like at this point, Eddie Brock's so like ingrained in all the different adaptations that you can't really change it. But I think initially... Okay, so do you know the original plan for what Venom was going to be?
No.
Okay, so Venom was originally going to be a woman.
That would have been so much better.
Okay, so Venom originally was so David Michelani. His plan was Venom was going to be a woman who was put into labor, and her husband had to drive her to the hospital. And then during a fight between Spider-Man and some villain, the husband would get like careened off the road, and the husband would die, and she'd lose the child. And so she'd go crazy and blame Spider-Man for that. The symbiote, like sensing so much of this grief when she's at the church, would bond to her, and then she'd become Venom. And the reason we didn't go with that is because the editor at Marvel at the time thought, well, no one would buy that a woman could beat up Spider-Man.
Oh, of course. Why would she be able to?
That's just great, isn't it?
Girls aren't super strong.
Even though Wonder Woman exists.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's dumb. That's just dumb. Unfortunate, but dumb. Okay. I don't know, like, at the same time, I'm not sure little kid me would have been as interested in female Venom as I am in, like, buff Spider-Man Venom, but I don't know. So maybe it's a blessing and a curse. Alright. The last thing I got that I want to make the point on with Venom is, because of so much of it's about the aesthetic, is I think there are these characters in comics that have a gimmick that's like, it's fine on their own. Like, Venom's just fine on his own across all of his different lore. But, just admittedly, you put the gimmick on another character and it's infinitely more interesting right away. Like, and I think that's kind of what the whole symbiote saga, if Spider-Man was a shonen anime, the symbiote saga
That's
is...
literally what the trades are called.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad. The symbiote saga where, like, you're just putting the symbiote on all these other characters got, like, it just gets more interesting. It's like Ghost Rider. You make someone else Ghost Rider, it's just awesome. You give someone else a Green Lantern ring. You give Batman a Green Lantern ring, and it's awesome. You put the Venom symbiote on literally anyone else. You put the Venom symbiote on the Hulk. How cool is that? It just keeps making things cooler. And I don't really have anywhere else to go with that. I just wanted to make sure I brought it up.
Well, no, I kind of like. I think this will also go because I do think I kind of like segued off that last question you asked me as well. Is I think the reason why I do like Flash Venom, just as a character, like the stories they've been in more than Eddie Venom, is because like again you have this established Spider-Man character who's like always wanted to be like Spider-Man. He's like Spider-Man's biggest fanboy since the first issue of Amazing Fantasy 15, and you give him the powers of Spider-Man. But then you also have the baggage of Flash Thompson was a bully, so he knows Peter Parker early, and he also has his own like fucked up childhood and like his own like he had an alcohol problem. He's also a veteran. He's also like a cripple, like he can't, and then he has to wear the Venom symbiote to walk. And you get into a lot of like the addiction there, and like the relationship is he's wearing it a bit too often just because he likes being able to be Spider-Man. But then at the same time, the symbiote's kind of taking advantage of that. So I like all of that things there, and I feel like that's inherently like you give this symbiote to a different established Spider-Man character, it gets cooler. Like there's the whole big thing recently with Spider-Man, like Dan Slott, how he ended his run was he gave the Carnage symbiote to Norman Osborn, and that immediately is just like a really cool idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hated in Ultimate Spider-Man. They were like, okay, we're gonna take Venom, the Spider-Man, the Venom symbiote, which was made from Spider-Man's DNA, and hard boil it down and cross it over with more of Spider-Man's DNA or whatever bullshit we're using, and this will create the ultimate serum to give to you, Norman Osborn. And I was like, oh, cool. They're actually going to go with Carnage instead of Green Goblin. No, it was still Green Goblin. Why? It makes so much more sense if it was Carnage.
Oh, that cartoon, it hurts my soul.
It's got such good moments, though. I can't deny it. It's got such great little shining gems of moments. Alrighty. Well, I think that'll do it. This is a fun one. I guess let's just go ahead and go on to recommendations real quick. So, I guess I'll recommend The Trial of Venom, which is a story, just a nice little one and done with Peter Parker and Matt Murdock, and they're trying to convict Eddie Brock, who apparently did nothing wrong, because he's almost getting away scot-free. It's kind of silly, but it's kind of fun, just one and done comic. I also, The beginning of the run on Venom from a couple years ago with Lee Harper, I believe the character's name was really interesting. It started out really strong. The second Eddie Brock shows up, just stop reading it. And then, give Spider-Man 3 another watch. I mean, maybe be a little drunk while you do it or something. What do you got to recommend? I'm expecting you to do some deeper pulls.
All right, well, maybe not deeper pulls because Venom is kind of like all the good stuff people mostly know because he's so popular. But I'd say, all right, so for Eddie Brock specifically, I think the best Eddie Brock's ever been done is the Spectacular Spider-Man. It's where it's kind of they merge Ultimate version where he's a childhood friend of Peter with the 616 version where he's like a bigger guy and he's kind of a douchebag, but at first you think you can like him as a guy, and then they do like a whole long period of time, which I think you have to do, and it's one of my favorite versions of Venom, and I think it's the best Eddie's ever been done. Then I think if you just want a really good Venom run, is Rick Remeda's Agent Venom with Flash. I think is probably the best written Venom's ever been. It's just really interesting and it's just good, fun comics. I think you can recommend. It gets a bit overplowed with like events and stuff as Marvel things kind of do, so you can't really enjoy it. But the first trade, at least, I'd really recommend. And then if you want something current, I actually am really, 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 really liking Donny Cates' Venom. And it's getting a lot of like huge critical praise, and it's doing something with Eddie, which is new. Seeing where it goes, but I've been really enjoying it, and that's what I'd recommend to anyone wanting to get into it now. It's the best place to be a Venom fan right now.
All right, sounds good. Everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.